The biting wind of a Chicago November didn't care if you were rich or poor, but at the corner of 5th and Main, Marcus Clay's brisket cart was the only warm thing for miles. It cut right through the layers of wool and denim, stinging exposed skin like invisible needles. Marcus rubbed his gloved hands together, the friction barely registering against the numbness, and turned the knob on his smoker. A cloud of hickory-scented steam billowed out, a fragrant ghost in the gray morning. This was his sanctuary, a 6x4 steel box that smelled of summer barbecues in the dead of winter. He glanced at the crumpled piece of paper in his back pocket, a final notice from his landlord. He didn't need to read it again to know the bold red letters by heart. 3 days. He had 3 days to come up with $600 or he'd be out on the street, just like the man sitting under the bare oak tree 10 feet away. Elias. That's what Marcus called him, though the old man had never confirmed it. He sat in a rusted wheelchair that looked like it had been salvaged from a scrap heap, a thin, moth-eaten blanket draped over his knees. He was as much a fixture of this corner as the cracked pavement. People walked past him with their heads down, eyes glued to phones or fixed on the horizon, practicing the city's favorite art form, aggressive ignorance. But Marcus saw him. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, Elias would be there, staring blankly at the traffic, his pale blue eyes watery from the cold. 1 brisket sandwich, extra spicy. And hurry it up, Clay, it's freezing out here, a gruff voice barked. Mr. Henderson. A regular who tipped in complaints rather than quarters. Marcus forced a smile, his breath puffing out in white clouds. Coming right up, Mr. Henderson. Hot enough to melt the snow. He deftly sliced the meat, the knife sliding through the tender brisket like butter. As he wrapped the sandwich, Henderson gestured vaguely toward the tree. You're still feeding that old ghost? He's probably sitting on a pile of cash, laughing at you. Don't waste your profit, son. Marcus didn't reply. He handed Henderson his lunch, took the cash, and waited for the man to hustle away toward the warmth of his office building. The street quieted down for a moment. Marcus looked at the smoker. There was a small pile of burnt ends, the caramelized, fatty, smoky nuggets that were arguably the best part of the brisket. He could sell them as a premium side dish. He needed to sell them. $600 meant every penny counted. But then he looked at Elias's hands. They were bare, shaking rhythmically against the metal armrest. The cold wasn't just weather to Elias. It was a predator. Marcus sighed, the tension in his chest loosening just enough to let the kindness in. He scooped the burnt ends into a large styrofoam container, added a generous ladle of hot juice, and a slice of cornbread. He walked over, the snow crunching under his boots. Eat up, Pops, Marcus said softly, placing the steaming box on the old man's lap. Keeps the cold out better than that blanket. For a long moment, Elias didn't move. Then, slowly, he looked down at the food, the steam warming his face. He looked up at Marcus. There were no words. There never were. Just a slow, deliberate nod. A silent acknowledgement that said, I see you. It was the only payment Marcus ever got, and somehow in that moment, it felt like enough. Marcus turned and walked back to his cart, wiping his hands on his apron. His phone buzzed against his hip. He pulled it out, hoping for an order. It was a text from his landlord. Payment due by Friday. Or vacate. He stared at the screen, the glow illuminating the worry etched into his face. He had just given away his lunch, and quite possibly his future. Generosity has a price, and for Marcus, that price was counting pennies by the light of a street lamp inside his freezing apartment because he couldn't afford to turn on the heat. 2 days had passed since the eviction notice, and the temperature in Chicago had plummeted, turning the city into a frozen wasteland of gray slush and biting winds. Inside his food cart, the warmth was fleeting. Business had been brutally slow. The snow kept people indoors, ordering delivery instead of braving the corner of 5th and Main. Marcus looked down at his cash box. It was light, terrifyingly light. If he sold the last portion of meat, he might have enough for a bus ticket home and maybe a can of soup. If he gave it away, he'd be walking 5 miles in the snow on an empty stomach. He looked through the serving window. The street was nearly empty, save for the silhouette under the oak tree. Elias was shaking. It wasn't a subtle shiver. His whole frame was vibrating against the rusted metal of the wheelchair. The blanket he usually wore was soaked through from the sleet. Marcus looked at the cash box, then at the brisket, then at the old man. He cursed softly under his breath, not at Elias, but at the unfairness of it all. He grabbed the meat, wrapped it tight, and then did something reckless. He unraveled the thick wool scarf from his own neck, the one his grandmother had knitted years ago. Stepping out into the gale, Marcus marched over to the tree. He didn't ask. He just acted. He placed the food on Elias's lap and then looped the warm wool scarf around the old man's frail neck, tucking it in gently. "Keep this, Pops," Marcus said, his voice fighting the wind. "I got thick skin. You need it more than I do." Elias reached up, his fingers brushing against the wool, looking at Marcus with wide, disbelief-filled eyes. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the cold stole his words, so he just gripped Marcus's wrist for a fleeting second, a grip surprisingly strong for a man so frail. It was then that Marcus noticed it. A sleek, black sedan was parked across the street, engine idling, exhaust puffing white smoke into the air. It had tinted windows, dark as oil, and it had been sitting there for an hour. It wasn't a customer. It felt like a predator. Marcus felt a surge of protective instinct rise in his chest. He stepped between the wheelchair and the car, puffing out his chest to look bigger, broader. He stared directly at the windshield, his jaw set, silently daring the driver to try something. "Move along," he muttered to himself. After a tense minute that felt like an hour, the sedan's brake lights flared red, and it slowly pulled away, disappearing into the traffic. Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. The adrenaline faded, replaced by the biting cold now attacking his exposed neck. "Crazy city, huh, pups?" he said over his shoulder, turning to check on his friend one last time before packing up. But when he turned around, the air left his lungs. Marcus packed up for the day, feeling uneasy. He turned to say goodbye to Elias, but the wheelchair was empty. The old man was gone, leaving the food and the scarf neatly folded on the curb. The empty space under the oak tree felt louder than the traffic roaring past. It was a silence that made Marcus's stomach churn. For the first time in 2 years, the corner of 5th and Main was just a corner. There was no rusted wheelchair, no frayed blanket, and no quiet nod to start the morning. The snow had covered the pavement in a thick white sheet, effectively erasing any trace that Elias had ever been there. Marcus tried to focus on his work, but his rhythm was broken. He chopped an onion with too much force, the blade hitting the cutting board with a dull thud, and moments later, the sharp smell of burning vegetable oil filled the cart. He had forgotten to turn the heat down. Cursing under his breath, he scraped the blackened onions into the trash. His eyes kept darting back to the tree, scanning every face in the crowd, hoping to see that familiar slump of shoulders or the glint of metal wheels. "Hey, Earl," Marcus called out to a sanitation worker emptying a nearby bin, his voice tight with worry. "You seen the old man? The one in the chair?" Earl paused, leaning on his broom, and shrugged indifferent. "Can't say I have. Maybe the cold finally got him. Or maybe he moved on. They always move on." He went back to sweeping, dismissing a human life as easily as he brushed away the slush. Marcus gripped the counter of his cart until his knuckles turned white. The scarf was gone too. That was the detail that gnawed at him. If Elias had been taken to a shelter or a hospital, surely the scarf would have been dropped or left behind. But the curb was clean. It was as if the earth had simply opened up and swallowed him whole. By noon, the gray sky had darkened, and the usual lunch rush was thinning out. Marcus was wiping down the counter, mentally calculating how much gas he had left in the generator, when the atmosphere on the street shifted. The noise of the city seemed to dampen, swallowed by the hum of a precision-engineered engine. A sleek, black sedan, the same one from 2 days ago, rolled slowly down the street. It didn't blend in. It dominated the scenery. The polished chrome reflected the dreary buildings, distorting them into something expensive. It pulled up directly in front of Marcus's cart, blocking the view of the sidewalk, its tires crushing the dirty slush with arrogant ease. Marcus stiffened. His hand instinctively drifted toward the handle of his carving knife, not to use it, but for the comfort of holding something solid. He thought of the eviction notice. Was this it? Had the landlord sent high-priced lawyers to kick him off the corner before Friday? The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than Marcus made in a year. He opened an umbrella with a crisp snap, shielding himself from the falling snow, and walked around the car. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a mirror shine, and he stepped gingerly, looking at the puddles of grease and mud with mild distaste. "Mr. Clay," the man asked. His voice was refined, carrying a British accent that cut through the street noise like a silver blade. He didn't look at the menu, didn't look at the smoker. His eyes were fixed on Marcus. Marcus didn't let go of the counter. "Who's asking?" "My name is Arthur. I am an associate of a mutual acquaintance," the man said, his face impassive. He reached into his inner jacket pocket. Marcus flinched, muscles coiling, but Arthur simply produced a thick, cream-colored envelope embossed with gold leaf. It looked alien against the backdrop of peeling paint and gray snow. "I have been instructed to deliver this to you personally. Your presence is requested." He extended the envelope across the serving window. Marcus hesitated. He looked at his own hands stained with paprika, charcoal dust, and grease, and then at the pristine paper. He wiped his hands vigorously on his apron, but the stains were stubborn. Slowly, he reached out and took it. The paper felt heavy, like fabric. "Today, 4 p.m. Do not be late," Arthur said, checking a silver watch on his wrist. "The address is on the card." With a curt nod, he turned on his heel, got back into the warmth of the sedan, and drove away, leaving Marcus standing in a cloud of exhaust and confusion. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. He turned the envelope over. There was no stamp, no return address. Just his name, handwritten in elegant cursive ink. With trembling fingers, he tore the seal. Inside was a key card with a magnetic strip and a single sheet of heavy stationery. He read the words, his breath catching in his throat. It wasn't a lawsuit. It wasn't an eviction. It was a summons to the Grand Sterling Hotel, the most expensive building in the city. Marcus stood alone on the sidewalk, holding the expensive paper with his grease-stained hands. The note inside reads just one line, "For the brisket. Room 402. The lobby of the Grand Sterling smelled of lavender and old money, a specific, heavy scent that made Marcus painfully aware of every grease stain on his work boots and the lingering aroma of hickory smoke clinging to his flannel shirt. He felt small here. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, supported by marble pillars that looked like they cost more than his entire neighborhood. People moved across the floor with a hushed elegance, their shoes clicking softly on the polished stone, while Marcus felt like an intruder who had stumbled onto a movie set. He gripped the cream-colored envelope tightly, using it as a shield, a proof that he hadn't just wandered in off the street to escape the cold. Arthur, the impeccably dressed assistant, guided him toward a private elevator at the back, bypassing the curious glances of the concierge. "Top floor," Arthur said simply, pressing a button that had no number, just a golden star. The elevator rose smoothly, so quiet that the only sensation of movement was the popping of Marcus's ears. As the numbers climbed 10, 20, 30, 40, Marcus's anxiety rose with them. He thought of Elias. Had the old man been arrested? Was this some kind of high-end hospital where the state dumped the indigent when they had nowhere else to go? But when the doors slid open with a soft chime, that theory evaporated instantly. They stepped directly into a penthouse suite that was larger than Marcus's entire apartment building. The room was bathed in the warm, golden glow of recessed lighting, a stark contrast to the gray twilight outside. One entire wall was made of glass, offering a panoramic view of Chicago. From up here, the city didn't look cold or cruel. It looked like a jewelry box, glittering with millions of lights. But Marcus didn't care about the view. His eyes darted around the room, searching for the rusted wheelchair, the moth-eaten blanket, the shivering figure of his friend. "Elias," Marcus called out, his voice cracking slightly in the vast silence. "He is waiting for you by the window, Mr. Clay," Arthur said, gesturing toward a high-backed leather chair facing the glass wall. Then, with a professional nod, Arthur retreated into the hallway, leaving Marcus alone. Marcus took a step forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. He approached the chair slowly, afraid of what he might find. "Pops? You okay? You scared me half to death disappearing like that." The chair hummed a low, electric sound, and slowly rotated. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. The man sitting there was not the Elias he knew. The tangled gray beard was gone, replaced by a clean, sharp shave that revealed a strong jawline. The dirty, oversized coat was replaced by a charcoal gray suit that fit perfectly across broad shoulders. The rusted manual wheelchair was gone, swapped for a sleek, high-tech motorized model with leather seating. But then the man looked up. The eyes. They were the same watery, piercing blue eyes that had watched Marcus every morning for months. Elias. Marcus whispered, the name feeling heavy and foreign on his tongue. Is that you? The man didn't nod. He didn't gesture. For the first time since Marcus had met him, he took a deep breath and opened his mouth. I am sorry for the worry I caused you, Marcus, he said. His voice was not weak or raspy from disuse. It was a deep, resonant baritone, the kind of voice that commanded boardrooms and silenced crowds. But it was necessary. Marcus staggered back a step, his legs hitting the edge of a mahogany coffee table. You can talk, he stammered, his mind racing to catch up. You can talk. You're clean. You're in a penthouse. What is this? Did you win the lottery? Or were you playing me this whole time? A flush of anger mixed with his confusion. I gave you my scarf, man. I gave you my lunch when I didn't have enough to eat myself. Was it a game to you? Elias's expression softened, the authority in his face melting into something more vulnerable. He drove his chair forward, closing the distance between them. It was never a game, Marcus. It was a test. But not for you. For the world. He gestured to the window, to the sprawling city below. 5 years ago, I ran this city. I built half the skyline you see out there. I had friends who laughed at my jokes and partners who shook my hand. But when I got sick, when my company took a hit and the rumors started that I was finished, the phone stopped ringing. The invites stopped coming. I realized I was surrounded by people who loved my wallet, but didn't give a damn about my soul. Marcus listened, the anger slowly ebbing away, replaced by a stunned realization. Elias continued, his voice thick with emotion. I wanted to know if there was anyone left who would help a man who had absolutely nothing to offer in return. No influence. No money. Just hunger. He looked Marcus dead in the eye, his gaze intense. Hundreds of people walked past me on that corner, Marcus. They looked through me. They looked over me. But you looked at me. You fed me. You kept me warm. Elias paused, letting the silence fill the room, heavy and profound. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the armrests of his chair. They called me a beggar, Marcus. They called me a ghost. A small, sad smile played on his lips. But the truth is, I'm a billionaire. The words hung in the air, vibrating with a weight that made the room feel smaller. Marcus stared at him, his mouth slightly open, the word billionaire echoing in his head like a gunshot. Elias Thorne, Marcus whispered, the name suddenly clicking from old newspapers he'd used to wrap fish. You're Elias Thorne. The Steel King. That was my title, Elias corrected gently. But on that corner, thanks to you, I was just a human being. He reached onto the desk beside him and picked up a thick leather folder. He extended it toward Marcus. I don't just want to thank you, Marcus. A check would be an insult to what you did. I don't want to pay you off. Marcus looked at the folder, his hands still trembling. Then what do you want? I want a partner, Elias said firmly. I'm starting a new foundation. The Claythorne Initiative. I have the capital, Marcus, but I've been in this tower too long. I've forgotten what the street feels like. You haven't. You have the heart this city needs. He pushed the folder into Marcus's chest. Take it. Read it. And tell me if you're ready to stop feeding one old man and start feeding the whole city. 5. A signature on a piece of paper should be a simple thing, a mere formality of ink and intent. But in a city divided by invisible lines, Marcus Clay knew that walking through a front door could feel like an act of war. The city administration building stood like a fortress in the center of downtown, a monolith of limestone and glass, designed to intimidate anyone who didn't own a tie. It was 2 days after the meeting in the penthouse, and Elias had insisted they come here personally to register the Claythorne Foundation. He wanted Marcus's name on the deed, in bold letters, legal and binding. Marcus had tried to dress for the occasion. He wore his best flannel shirt, the one with the least fraying at the collar, tucked neatly into his dark denim jeans. He had scrubbed his work boots until the leather was raw, trying to erase the ghost of grease stains, but they still looked like what they were. Boots meant for standing on concrete, not walking on Italian marble. Beside him, Elias moved with the silent grace of his new motorized chair, dressed in a navy blazer that whispered authority. As they approached the revolving glass doors, Marcus felt his stomach tighten. It was a familiar sensation, a phantom weight on his chest that he had carried since he was a teenager. He straightened his spine, lifting his chin. "You belong here," he told himself. "You're a partner." Elias rolled through the automatic doors first. The security guard stationed at the desk, a towering man with a buzz cut and a uniform that strained at the biceps, nodded respectfully. "Good morning, sir," the guard said, his voice crisp. Elias nodded back, not stopping. But when Marcus stepped into the climate-controlled coolness of the lobby, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The guard's eyes snapped toward him, narrowing. He didn't see a philanthropist. He didn't see a partner. He saw a broad-shouldered black man in work clothes. He stepped out from behind the podium, blocking Marcus's path with a practiced, casual menace. "Hold up there, pal," the guard said, his voice dropping an octave, losing all the warmth he had just shown Elias. He didn't raise a hand, but his body language was a barricade. "Deliveries are around the back. Service entrance is on 4th Street. Marcus stopped, the blood rushing to his ears. The lobby was busy. Lawyers in suits, clerks with files, citizens paying taxes. Heads turned. The quiet hum of conversation dipped, just for a second, as people watched the scene unfold. It was the kind of public undressing Marcus hated most, the assumption that his presence was a mistake, an error to be corrected. "I'm not making a delivery," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady, though his fists clenched at his sides. "I'm here for a meeting. Registration department." The guard looked him up and down, lingering on the scuffed boots and the calloused hands. A smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Registration, huh? Look, buddy, we don't need any more janitorial staff today, and even if we did, you need a badge to be in this lobby. So why don't you turn around and—" "He is with me." The voice cut through the air like a whip crack. It wasn't loud, but it froze the guard mid-sentence. Elias had stopped his chair 10 feet away. He pivoted slowly, turning to face them. His expression was unreadable, stone-cold. The guard blinked, confused. "Sir? I'm just handling some unauthorized access. This gentleman," Elias corrected, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy calm, "is my business partner. We are here to meet with the city clerk. And if you continue to block his path, you will be explaining to the mayor, who is a personal friend of mine, why his biggest donor was harassed in his own lobby." The silence that followed was deafening. The guard's face went through a rapid transformation, confusion, realization, and then a pale, sickly fear. He looked at Elias's expensive suit, then back at Marcus, trying to reconcile the two images. The power dynamic had flipped so violently it left him dizzy. I apologize, sir," the guard stammered, stepping back, his posture shrinking. He looked at Marcus, avoiding eye contact. "I didn't realize. I mean, we have strict protocols." Marcus looked at the man. He could have shouted. He could have demanded an apology. But he saw the fear in the guard's eyes, and he realized he didn't need to shout. Dignity wasn't about being loud. It was about standing your ground. "Next time," Marcus said softly, "look at the man, not the clothes." "Yes, sir." "Of course, sir," the guard mumbled, retreating behind his desk. Marcus walked past him, his boots clicking rhythmically on the marble. He caught up to Elias, who was waiting by the elevator bank. The old man didn't say a word, didn't offer a pitying look. He just pressed the up button. But as the elevator doors slid open, revealing their reflections in the polished brass, one man in a suit, one in flannel, standing side by side, Marcus felt a shift. They stepped inside, and the doors closed, sealing out the lobby and the staring eyes. Marcus looked at his reflection. He realized that Elias's money could open the door, but it was his own resilience that had walked him through it. The battle wasn't over. The world hadn't changed in 5 minutes. But as the elevator climbed toward the top floor, Marcus knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let anyone make him feel small ever again. Camera flashes were blinding, like lightning trapped in a ballroom, but Marcus wasn't looking at the photographers. He stood on a raised stage at the Grand Sterling Hotel, the same place where he had first learned the truth about Elias. But this time, the room was filled with 500 of Chicago's elite. They were applauding, a thunderous sound that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. Marcus wore a tuxedo that had been tailored to fit his broad shoulders perfectly, but he couldn't help but tug at the cuffs. He felt like an actor in someone else's play. On the tables in front of him, waiters were serving the main course: smoked brisket, burned ends, presented on silver platters with a delicate garnish, a humble street food elevated to high art. It was Elias's idea, a reminder that sustenance is the same, whether served on china or styrofoam. Marcus leaned into the microphone, and the room fell into a respectful silence. He looked down at his hands that still bore the faint scars of grease burns and knife slips. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady but low. "You are all clapping for the co-founder of a foundation. You see a man standing next to a billionaire." He gestured to Elias, who sat beaming in the front row. "But the truth is, I didn't feed a billionaire. I didn't know who Elias was. I fed a hungry neighbor. I fed a man who was cold." Marcus paused, looking into the eyes of the crowd. "Don't let the suits and the checks fool you. The real work isn't done in rooms like this. It's done on the corners where people walk by without looking. If you want to honor us tonight, don't just write a check. Look at someone. Really look at them." 6 months later, Clay's Kitchen opened its doors in the heart of the South Loop. It was a beautiful space, with exposed brick walls and the smell of hickory smoke permanently etched into the air. The reviews were glowing, calling Marcus a culinary revelation and a local hero. But there was one detail that confused the food critics. Right next to the polished brass entrance, there was a small, discreet sign that read, "If you are hungry and cannot pay, you eat for free." No questions asked. The restaurant was a success, a bustling engine of noise and profit. But as the winter months returned, wrapping Chicago in another gray embrace, Marcus felt a familiar itch. Success was loud. Gratitude was loud. He missed the quiet. On a Saturday morning in December, exactly 1 year after he had given Elias his scarf, Marcus hung up his chef's coat in his office. He walked out the back door to the alley where a vehicle was parked. It wasn't a luxury sedan. It was his old food cart, welded onto the back of a refurbished pickup truck, freshly painted in matte blue with the words Elias and Marcus Outreach stenciled on the side. He didn't take a driver or a camera crew. He drove alone. He navigated the truck through the slushy streets, away from the skyscrapers and back toward the neighborhood of 5th and Main. The old oak tree was still there, bare and skeletal against the sky. The corner was empty of the food cart, but the ghost of his past life lingered there. Marcus parked the truck and lowered the serving window. The wind was just as sharp as he remembered. He stood there for a while, just breathing in the cold air, waiting. And then he saw him. A boy, maybe 10 years old, emerged from the alleyway across the street. He was wearing a hoodie that was 2 sizes too big, the sleeves hanging over his hands, and sneakers that were soaked through with snow. He walked with a guarded hunch, eyes scanning the ground for loose change or trouble. He stopped when he saw the truck, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. He looked like a stray cat, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Marcus didn't call out. He didn't wave. He knew the language of the street. Sudden movements meant a threat. Instead, he turned to his warmer. He pulled out a large container, filling it with steaming rice, beans, and a massive heap of the brisket, burnt ends the best part. He closed the lid, stepped out of the truck, and walked to the edge of the sidewalk. He placed the box on a dry patch of concrete near the tree, exactly where he used to place Elias's meal. Then he stepped back, giving the boy space. The boy watched him, eyes wide, calculating the risk. The smell of the meat drifted across the street, a warm invitation in the freezing air. Slowly, cautiously, the boy stepped off the curb. He walked over to the box, looked at Marcus, then down at the food. He hesitated, waiting for the catch, waiting for the lecture or the camera. Marcus just smiled, a small, sad, knowing smile. He saw himself in the boy. He saw Elias. He saw the invisible thread that connected them all. "It's warm," Marcus said softly, his voice carried by the wind. "And it's yours." The boy grabbed the box, clutching it to his chest like a treasure, and for a split second, his guard dropped. He nodded a quick, sharp jerk of the chin before turning and running back toward the safety of the alley. Marcus watched him go, the snow beginning to fall again, covering the city in a fresh coat of white. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a celebrity. He was just a man on a corner, and for the first time in a long time, he felt completely, perfectly rich. We often go through life measuring worth by the things we can see: the suits, the cars, the titles on a door. We teach ourselves to look up at the skyscrapers, admiring the height, but we forget to look down at the foundation that holds it all together. Marcus's story reminds us of a simple, powerful truth. Dignity is not a luxury reserved for the rich. It is a basic human need, as vital as bread and water. Elias Thorne had billions in the bank, but he was starving for the one thing money couldn't buy: the feeling of being seen. It wasn't the brisket that saved him. It was the scarf. It was the moment a man with nothing gave everything he had to a stranger. In a world that is constantly shouting for attention, kindness is a quiet language. It doesn't need cameras. It doesn't need applause. It only needs one person willing to stop, to look, and to say, "I see you and you matter." So, as you go about your week, I invite you to look a little closer at the world around you. Maybe the person serving your coffee, or the quiet soul sitting on the park bench, is fighting a battle you know nothing about. You don't need to be a billionaire to change a life, and you don't need to be a saint to be a hero. Sometimes, you just need to be the one who offers a warm meal on a cold day. If this story warmed your heart today, please share it with someone who might need a reminder that there is still good in this world. And tell us in the comments, have you ever been on the receiving end of a stranger's kindness? We would love to hear your story. Until next time, stay warm and keep your heart open.